Buongiorno and bentornati to this three-part series on fast-tracking your Italian. Now, this is video 2 of the series, so if you haven't seen video 1, I suggest you click on the side and watch video 1 first and then come back to this video. So, today we're going to look at how to master 50% of the Italian vocabulary in close to no time. And there's a couple of really powerful tricks that you will like, I'm sure. And then coming up, we also have speaking in longer sentences and then learning learning Italian for travelers in as little as 5 weeks. So let's get started with today's video, and the topic is vocabulary. So we'll look at why learning Italian vocabulary is easy, which is essential like we talked last time. Knowing a lot of vocabulary is going to help you immensely. Now we'll look at tricks to immediately learn 50% of the Italian vocabulary, and we'll also look at how to use English to learn Italian and how to use English to speak more Italian and to understand more Italian. So this is really powerful stuff, okay? So let's have a look at the first piece of information for today. Now, English and Italian. Now, you think that Italian and English are very different, and they are. In theory, they have different origins. So English is what we call as Germanic language, so it's related to German and Dutch and so on. And Italian is a Romance language, so it's based on Latin, and it's related to French and Spanish and Portuguese and Romanian. Did I say French? No, oh, yeah, I think I did. But there is good news. There is good news for all English speakers wanting to learn Italian, is that because of history, English is now 50%, so 50%, which is a huge percentage, Latin-based. That means really that for every other English word, there's a word that comes from Latin, which means it's a word that it's related to Italian. So let me explain this this point first. Now we'll look at that in a minute. Let me explain this point first. I think it's really going to help you. Latin-based words in English are not as commonly used on a day-to-day basis, but they do exist in the vocabulary. So what this means is that normally you would use a Germanic word for a day-to-day conversation, but then you would use the Latin word to talk about that topic, or at a higher register, or as an adjective. So it sounds complicated, but you'll see a few examples in a minute and you'll see what I mean. So the idea is that you understand that if you're thinking a word in English that it's purely Germanic, there's no chance that word is going to exist in Italian. So if you're trying to speak Italian, my first advice would be, and I'll show you how to do that, do not use Germanic-based English words, but use Latin-based English words as you think in your thoughts. That way it's going to be easy to find an Italian word or make up a word in Italian that they are going to understand. Okay, so that was really the first thing. Now, as you're listening Italian, which is probably going to be more of your case if you're going for a holiday, you'll hear more than you speak, obviously. This applies as well in passive mode. As you're listening to Italian, you should be doing 2 things with your brain. Well, 3 things. One is relax. You're on a holiday. Okay, you're on a holiday, so it's no big deal if there's some misunderstanding or if you don't understand everything. But the 2 things that you want to be doing with your brain is, first is keep focusing on the context. What is the most likely thing to be said right now given the situation? You know, I'm in line at a shop, or I'm ordering food, or I'm being served at the bank. Think of what's the most logical thing. What are they going to talk about? You know, if you're in a jewelry shop, well, are they going to talk about gold and carats? Probably. there's certain things that are attached to each context. So keep thinking about that. And also, as you're hearing Italian, as you're hearing the words, think of what English word do I know that would apply to this context? And you'll find that the words that you know, there are plenty. There are plenty of words that you expect from a context that are going to be said in Italian. The only thing that you gotta be careful is the Italian word they'll say is probably not going to be the word that you use for that specific thing, but you'll understand it nonetheless. And I've got examples coming up, so you'll really see what I mean. So let's move on to the next thing. And here it is. How to spot a Latin-based English word. Like I said, if you're thinking a Germanic-based word, there's no chance it's going to exist in Italian. If you're thinking a Latin-based English word, there are millions of chances for that word to exist in Italian, and that's what we are really wanting to focus on. So, what does a Latin-based English word look like to you? Well, Latin words are long and Germanic words are short. That's a very rough guideline, but that's how it is. So you have a Latin-based word. If the word you're thinking is long, usually it has 2, but usually more syllables, like 3 or 4 or 5 syllables. Okay, so there are several vowels, and the vowels are usually presented in a very neat sequence: consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, some exceptions. And there are no long strings of consonants. Now, after I've said these 3 things, you realize that what I'm saying is that pretty much you have a Latin-based word in English if the word visually looks like an Italian word. Now, you know plenty of Italian words because you're surrounded by Italian things in your country. Food, there's so much food that you use in your everyday life that is Italian. Plus, architecture and fashion. There's so many things, music. So if you're a musician, like you got like legato. If you look at the word legato, it's 3 syllables, legato. But going back to more common things like cappuccino, 4 clear syllables. Consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. Pasta, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. There's, like I said, there could be 2 consonants, or the order could be vowel, consonant, but you get what I mean. A Latin-based word is a long word that has several vowels and several syllables. And there are no long strings of consonants, meaning 3, 4 consonants. Italian doesn't do that. It just doesn't exist in Italian, which means if the word you're thinking has them, probably it's not Latin. So let's have a look at more of the specifics. So the English word thoughtful. Now that's a tricky one because you think it's long, but look at how many consonants there are and how few vowels. And you say, well, there's 3 vowels. It's still not many, but when you say it, it's thoughtful. There's only 2 semi-vowels, yeah? Plus, there's a bunch of consonants, G, H, T, F. Latin doesn't have those combinations, so that word is not going to exist. But if you replace thoughtful with the English word pensive, that's a Latin-based word that has the same meaning, pensive. Now I'll give you better examples, or examples that are going to make more sense. If you're talking about this in English, you'll say tooth. Now tooth is a very Germanic word. It's short, lots of consonants, doesn't have a lot of vowels. It's like tooth is 1 vowel, sound-wise. But then when you talk about teeth and you describe them, you talk about dental issues, you go to the dentist, you put on a denture, that would be the Latin equivalent of tooth. And so as you're looking to find an Italian word that means tooth, or as you're hearing the words spoken by Italians, You're not going to hear anything that sounds like tooth to mean tooth. You'll hear something that sounds like dental or dentist to mean tooth. And the Italian word for tooth is dente. And in the right context, you'd understand it. So, I have one more example. The word for eye. Again, it's a Germanic word for body part, but the Latin word that we use to talk about our eyes is ocular. Okay. And so the word for this is occhio. And in the right context, you would understand it. So, I hope that was helpful. And so my advice, before we look at that, my advice would be to really, oops, sorry. Oh, it's just not going. Well, leave it there. My advice is really to remember that half of what they say in Italian, you should understand because you have those words in English. And that's your number one goal because you'll be in listening mode more than you're in speaking mode. But as you learn to speak more, and you need to speak more, you do the same. Don't choose the Germanic word to say something. Find a Latin equivalent. And this is a skill that you can develop and I can help you develop, but this is just the basic idea that I think is very powerful. And now let's move on to the third topic of today's video, which is cheat patterns for quick vocabulary expansion, like ways that you can learn a lot of vocabulary in no time. So when you have English words that end with shon, what you have is most likely a word that you can make up. The first part, everything before the shon, you're going to keep the same. And then you change in the shon for zione. So if you look at attenzione, you should be able to understand what that means. But you should be able to make it up. Because when you're thinking of attention, you have atten and then shon. So if you do what I just said, you keep the atten, but instead of saying shon, you say zione, attenzione. You have an Italian word magically. Stazione. So what is a stazione? Well, it's a station. And then we have motivazione, it's motivation. And the more difficult one to pronounce, audizione, it's an audition. Now, you say, oh, it's not the same, but it is, the spelling is the same. If you look at audizione, well, A-U-D-I is what you have in audition. You're just changing the shon for zione, but then you're pronouncing in the Italian way. And, you should kind of learn how to pronounce the Italian vowels. I can help you with that. I actually have a course that teaches that. Get in touch with me if you're interested. Anyway, so let's move on to another example. Shon or sion. So when you have a word in English that ends with S-I-O-N, well, you have the same word that ends with sione in Italian. So you have this decisione, decisione, persuasione, and occasione. Decision, persuasion, and occasion. Occasione, you want to find those if you're shopping. A good deal. It's called an occasione. It's a great opportunity, isn't it? And I have one more of those tricks. I mean, there's so many tricks. I'm just sharing a few just to get you started and to realize that mastering Italian vocabulary is easy because you should, in a heartbeat, have half of it. Half of the relevant one. Obviously, Italian has a million words like English, but the ones that matter are not that many. Like I said, it's 500 probably words that really matter for your daily experience. Now, when you have words that end with li, so ly, well, you have words that end with mente. Now, this one is not infallible because you can have a word that ends with li in English that is a Germanic word like quickly. So you're not going to have quickamente, okay, because quick is very Germanic. So you hear this one doesn't work all the time. The other two kind of work all the time. With this one, you have to say, okay, is the word I'm using is Latin word. So let's have a look at a few examples. Creativamente, creativamente. So it's creatively, yeah, creatively. Gentilmente, it's gently. Poeticamente, poetically. And differentemente, which sounds like a mouthful, but it's differently. Because it's different is the same, and then instead of li we have mente. So differentemente. And then one final trick for today, and it's words in English end with ment. And you have Italian words that end with mento, so they're pretty much the same as English. So argomento is an argument. You know, a few things change, but my point is if you hear it, you'll understand it. And if you're trying to say and you said argumento, instead of argomento, they'll get it, because it's pretty much the same thing, isn't it? Condimento, it's a condiment. And monumento, we saw this one before, it's monumento, it's a monument. And complimento is a compliment, isn't it? Okay, so that was all for today. I hope you enjoyed it. In the next video, we'll look at speaking in long, complex sentences and how you can learn Italian for travels in just 5 weeks. So until the next video, arrivederci e buona serata.